The main goal of this project is to provide an alternative The main goal of the project is to provide an alternative to usual lectures and drills for disaster preparedness. So in particular, yung disaster is yung typhoon. The objective of the application is to teach lessons on best practices, lessons on hazards, and warning signals. Other than the pedagogical impact, the implicit goal also involves change in behavior. So this is where experiential learning comes in. By providing a simulation of a certain scenario, there is a higher level of immersion for the student, which can better guarantee the user's recall of procedures and do's and don'ts. So for the rules of the game, the application provides a simulation of two scenarios. Scenario just before a typhoon and during a typhoon. So the player has two main tasks. First is to prepare an emergency preparedness kit. So yung tinatawag nilang go bag. And second is to go to an evacuation center. So lalabas sila ng bahay and will go to a school, yung designated na evacuation center. So for the what makes the game interesting is yung checklist of things to prepare will be dependent on information provided by the player at the start of the game. So may non-playable character at the start of the game which will ask some information so that the game is personalized to the user. That will influence the checklist, and the checklist is located at a wall inside the house. Yeah. So the things are located in different parts of the house, and the player will have to move around to find the things to bring. Yan. And then ilalagay nila dun sa go bag. So to add some difficulty, there will be interactable things that are not in the checklist. So there can be cases where the player will get the wrong item. Before leaving the house, the player will have to perform necessary tasks like turn off the electricity or shut off the LPG tank valve. And while on the way to the evacuation center, the user is also presented hazards. So, anong example ng hazards? Downed electric poles. Yan. Kita ba? Yan. And then, still floodwater of unknown depth. And shallow but rapidly moving floodwater. So if the user specifies that his or her household involves some children, a kid will appear in the game asking whether it is safe to play in still floodwater. So yung basis ng do's and don'ts in the game are two references, available na training modules from Accord Incorporated at saka Flood and Safety Preparedness Tips published on the Susquehanna Flood Forecasting and Warning System website. Okay, so for tools and interaction, the application is intended to be affordable so that it can be used by anyone. And so the application is designed for Android smartphones. The expected head-mounted display to be used is Google Cardboard. Google Cardboard is a do-it-yourself type of HMD. You can assemble one. You can also buy, but it is cheaper as compared to other types of HMD. Although the setup is cheap, the controls are limited. So there are two basic controls. Gaze-based. So that means navigation by means of head orientation. That plus the action button in the head-mounted display. So you can interact with what you are gazing. So for example, to walk, you can gaze at an interactable tile like the one you see in the figure. That's also called a walker tile. And then click the action button to be able to move. To select an item to put in the bag, you will have to gaze at that item and then click the action button to pick it up. Uh, you'll notice a red circle in the middle of the screen. So you will have an idea of what you are gazing. And it gets highlighted to indicate that it is interactable. So for this type of VR application, the setup can be stationary. So one can just be sitting down and moving the head and clicking the action button. Since the goal of the application is to be an alternative to lectures, the narrative of the game is instruction and feedback based. So every time there is a correct or a wrong action, there is some message to reflect why the action is correct or incorrect. There are also variables that are tracked for a lot of things. The most important is to detect if the user needs to stop playing. So this is important because one concern when using VR as a tool in game development is motion sickness, nakakahilo. So to minimize motion sickness, the game should be played continuously for no more than 15 minutes. Variables are also tracked to detect if the user is already inactive or if the user needs help. So in those cases, the application can provide graphical hints like arrows or highlighted objects. And when he or she is already running out of time, the checklist is rearranged so that the things are sorted according to proximity to the user. So sino mas malapit, yun yung mas maunang ma-display. Yun yung nasa taas ng checklist. So last academic year, another group of students explored the use of almost the same game for a classroom setup. So the inspiration here is because there is already a core subject in the K-12 curriculum. The subject is called Disaster Readiness and Risk Reduction. So the question is, how can we use this as a supplementary tool for learning? In a classroom setup, we already have a teacher that does the lecturing. So the game can be used by the teacher as an assessment tool kasi na-cover na yung part about teaching. That is also good because both the students and the teacher can take advantage of the application. Now, you will notice another difference with the original application, which is yung use of a specialized equipment. So hindi na siya hindi na siya VR for mobile phones, but there is use of a specialized equipment, in particular, Oculus Quest. So since the app will be used in a classroom, maybe the school can spend more. Now, the question is, bakit? Why specialized equipment? So earlier, I mentioned that the controls for the more affordable setup is limited. The means to navigate the virtual world and to pick things up is not intuitive. Parang gaze, click, ganun. So a setup that makes use of a specialized equipment can address that. The proposed setup is as follows. So from the figure, the teacher first explains concepts beforehand, and then the teacher can log in to a web application to register the devices that will be used for the assessment. And then the assessment activity can proceed after. So kung gamitin mo na siya in a classroom, meron kang web app for registration. So this is a person using the Oculus Quest. Aside from the HMD, the setup also has motion controllers that can be used to implement virtual hands. So later we'll see. The way you move your hand in the real world influences the movement of your virtual hands. And the motion controllers also have buttons that you can click. So in the case of using Oculus Quest, you will need a large space since your movements in the physical world influences your movement in the virtual world. So that is one main difference with yung recent na setup because it is now yung tinatawag nilang room scale experience. So earlier in the 2019 setup, it's stationary. So I'll just summarize ano yung mga main features ng latest version. So one, you have to implement a web application mainly for two things: to configure settings and identify what tasks are to be done in the simulation. And then also after the assessment, you will use the application to see the statistics, the performance of your students, yung as a teacher. In the virtual world, they implemented the use of virtual hands. Yan. So that it is more intuitive to pick things up. So hindi na siya yung click-click ng action button. For navigation, the player can use teleportation movement using the motion controllers. So the user can press a button in the motion controller, point to a certain area, and then release to teleport to that area. The application was not tested in a classroom setup due to conflicts in schedule, but they were at least able to find testers for the application. So here are the results, and from the results, the effect of switching to a room scale setup becomes apparent. So the number of testers that experienced motion sickness is reduced from 60% to 14% with yung recent na setup. To note, may 20 testers dun sa 2019 na application and 14 testers dun sa recent na application. Okay, so ito naman, application for the elderly. I'll say this is an AR application because it's superimposing graphics in a view of the physical world. So the application is intended for use by the elderly. Yan. This project would like to contribute to a remote-friendly upper limb rehabilitation program for the elderly. Remote-friendly means it can be for home use, so that even when they get stuck at home, katulad ng nangyari during pandemic, they can still perform upper limb rehabilitation exercise. So the application is a desktop app. The setup is may laptop with a camera and then nakatapat yung player. Or yung recommended setup is you have a TV or a projector and also a web camera in front of you, and then the TV is used to project the screen of the laptop or the computer. Notice also that there is another person in the room. So that is a lesson, no? When designing applications for the elderly, since they may have health sensitivities, it's important that the elderly is not alone inside the room. There should be an observer or a caregiver that looks after the user. So the target parts of the body that are being exercised involves movement of the shoulder, the elbow, hands, and wrist. So ito yung mga upper extremities. For the design of the application, one consideration as advised by domain experts is to make it simple, relatable, and easy to understand. So the design is to implement several mini games for upper limb rehabilitation. So far, the developers, si Vitus and Gia, uh, were able to implement a game called toast catching. Yan, simple lang naman siya. The player simply needs to catch the falling toasted bread. Yan. It's simple, but it can be used to exercise the target upper extremities. So after the game, you have statistics that will describe yung performance in the game. So the application provides a way for the observer or the companion or the caregiver to see statistics so that may monitoring of performance. Also, the application provides a way for the companion to customize parameters in the game. So, yung pinaka-importante na nalaman namin is yung distance between successive toasts. Kasi it can be used to enforce the parts that we want to exercise. Kung short, so pwedeng ma-exercise yung kamay. Kung medium, yung elbow. Kung large, pati yung shoulder. So, in playing the game, importante rin sa elderly ay yung may reward, no? The player can earn gold and silver coins, and with that, they can buy items and essentially fill a room. Yun. There are adaptive mechanisms implemented to stay in a certain difficulty or increase or decrease, and that is dependent on some rules. The rules need information on the score of the player and the number of missed toasts to determine kung mag-i-increase or decrease or stay in the same difficulty. Adjustment in difficulty can be reflected on the toast speed, the size, or the distance. Okay, so I hope this gives you a good overview of some games we can design for different domains, tsaka yung iba-ibang type ng setup. May VR na stationary, may VR na room scale, and then may AR. So finally, I'd like to talk about the ongoing PCHRD funded project involving S3Lab. It actually started just last year, 2021. Kasama dun si Cyrus. PCHRD stands for Philippine Council of Health, Research and Development. So aside from S3Lab, the project also involves mga medical experts in UP Manila. And we also consult these domain experts in the undergrad special projects that are healthcare related and done at S3. So the goal of the project is to use immersive technologies to create enabling environments and as a result, create meaningful experiences for the target users. So bakit meaningful experiences at bakit enabling environment? Yan, because the target participants are mga patients na may dementia, so elderly with dementia, and children with cerebral palsy. Both types of patient have difficulty performing basic functions in the real world. So yung mga patients with dementia, they are mostly characterized by decline in memory, difficulty in language, may problems sila to perform everyday activities because of problems with thinking skills. Children with cerebral palsy have motor disabilities, so may problems sila with movement or problem maintaining balance and posture. For children with cerebral palsy, you can design mga games to help with rehabilitation. But for the case of mga patients with dementia, dementia has no cure. So, what you can do is manage yung behavioral and psychological symptoms ng patient. People with dementia can get irritated easily or they can get depressed, no? So a virtual world that can help them relax or can provide joy to them will help minimize yung mga ganong tendencies. So as mentioned earlier, when designing applications intended for those target users, importante yung simplicity at yung familiarity ng tasks, especially for patients with dementia, because they have to know what are they going to do in the virtual world. And because of that, it's important that they have someone they can interact with in the virtual world. So importante, isa sa mga insights na natutunan in the project is to have a virtual companion. So ito yung sample view during testing for the VR application intended for cerebral palsy. So mayroong yung therapist that guides the child, tas meron yung sa tech. And this is the view for testing kapag naman patients with dementia. So note that the testing at the current progress at the current phase is only for healthy volunteers. Because kailangan okay muna sa healthy bago yung clinical testing na for the actual target patients. So once the prototype succeeds in guaranteeing acceptability, usability, and safety for healthy volunteers, that's the only time that the project can proceed with clinical testing involving the target patients. Okay, I don't know how much time I have, but we have some demo. Teka lang let me check. 3 minutes na lang. Oh no, hindi ko napansin. Okay, so siguro na lang, ipapasa ko na kay Cyrus for the frequently asked questions on game dev para may input siya. Cyrus? Let me stop my screen share.
And good afternoon sa lahat, and thank you for having us this afternoon. Ito, yung i-share ko nga about sa ating S3 Dev frequently asked questions. So usually, syempre unang tinatanong sa amin is what types of games that we usually do sa ating laboratory. So katulad na sabi kanina ni Dr. Wayong, we usually do VR and AR games wherein ang goal talaga namin is to really create lives, to create games that will really help us ease sa life natin, ganyan. And at the same time, hindi lang siya games just to enjoy, just to have fun, but there's a purpose in doing these games. So, yun. VR and AR games. So pagdating sa VR, we usually use the Oculus. I think I can show you an example of the device. This one. So for AR devices or VR devices, we are actually using yung ating Oculus. So ito siya. So ito yung ginagamit naming device for testing at the same time sa development ng aming mga games. So this is called Oculus Quest 2. Ayan, by MetaQuest. Tapos, when it comes naman sa AR, usually we develop mobile applications, especially Android-based. So, ang gamit namin dito is, sige, going doon sa susunod na question. Ayan, what platforms do you use to create this game? So, in creating our VR and AR games, we usually use Unity, ayan, as our application platform or game development platform. And at the same time, it comes through with some packages. Like for VR, we use Google Box, SDK, Android SDK for developing Android applications. At the same time, Vuforia package for AR naman. So yung Vuforia kasi, it actually uses our phone cameras to detect image triggers para dun lalabas yung ating mga model. So like kung meron tayong image like star, gusto nating magkaroon ng lumulutang na star and we want to scan a image of a star, then we using Vuforia package to locate yung image ng mga stars na yan, and there doon ilalagay ng ating Vuforia or yung ating device yung mga stars na gusto nating ipalutang. So that's how AR works. The next, and how do you start with creating this game? So sa amin, when we created, or actually when we started with the project, we first had our brainstorming. So it actually starts with talking to each other sa mga team na gusto mong buuin to really create this application. At the same time, ang una namin iniisip, for who or for what purpose are we doing these applications? So doon sa aming project na hinawakan namin ngayon, we create games to help people in terms of medical therapy. At the same time, meron din kaming goal to really create games to educate people. At the same time, to elevate educational experience pagdating din sa mga bata. So hindi lang siya about hindi lang limited yung ating games just for fun, but it is also expanded in terms of medical, in terms of education, and for sure may extend pa to most likely in terms of trainings, ganyan, especially sa
Yes.
ating uh,
Cyrus,
No po, sorry po. But I have to cut na po because we need to po. Thank you po,
yes.
ma'am
Maraming
and
salamat,
sir.
Cyrus, for the
yeah,
input.
Thank you po. So, thank you very much, Ma'am Rich and Sir Cyrus, for imparting your valuable knowledge and a significant awareness about game development to us. A virtual round of applause, everyone. Yeah. Uh, so unfortunately, we don't have enough time for our Q&A session, but don't fret. We still have a lot in store for you in our next segments. So on behalf of the CSS 6.0 team, we would like to present this certificate to Dr. Richelle Wayong for joining us here today. This certificate of appreciation is presented to Dr. Richelle Wayong for imparting their valuable insights on game development as a breakout session speaker for the UP Association of Computer Science Major or UP Cursors Computer Science Summit 6.0 given this 3rd of September 2022, signed by the CSS 6.0 organizers. So let's take a few minutes po for the photo op. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, smile. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, so again, thank you very much, Dr. Wayong, for joining us today. And also thank you, Dr. Sir Cyrus. And we are grateful for the time you have spent with us. Participants, you may now leave the breakout room and go back to the main lobby. Thank you guys and see you there. For the remaining participants po dito, kindly be informed that imove na lang po namin kayo sa main group.